the jolly swagmen camped by a billabong under the shade of a cool.
Japanese troops landed on the coast of Malaya and were pushing southward towards strategic Singapore.
Remember that line, Carrot Shillong.
Within a few days, a sizable Japanese force was successfully ashore, ready to launch a full-scale offensive against the British down the Malayan Peninsula.
World War II was one of the most significant events of the 20th century, impacting the lives of many Australian men and women forever. Many Australians showed great courage in the face of much adversity. Even in the face of death, they triumphed. Here's the story of one man and his battalion, the story of Douglas Gray Simpson in the 2nd 19th Battalion. Welcome to Redeemer Baptist School. Located in North Parramatta, Sydney, the school is situated on the historic Burnside homes. At the front of the property there is a garden, and in that garden there is a memorial, a war memorial, commemorating the lives of some 21 boys who lived in the homes as orphan children, and who as young adults sacrificed their lives in the Second World War. Douglas Simpson is one of these 21 names, 21 young men who died in the Second World War. Young men who sacrificed everything to defend and preserve our freedom.
Douglas Gray Simpson was born on the 5th of June 1916 in a small country town of Scone in northern New South Wales. Douglas's early life was far from easy. At the age of 10, his mother Helen and his father Henry both died within the space of a month. Before his father passed away, he expressed a wish that his son be placed in a Protestant home. Douglas was therefore left in the care of Burnside. Burnside was an institution set up by the late Sir James Burns to care for orphaned and destitute children. These homes, built from 1909, were designed to house large groups of children that would live in a family-like situation. Douglas completed the intermediate high school examination and left the Burnside homes in December 1931, having spent 7 years in their care.
Douglas Simpson enlisted in the Australian Imperial Forces on the 24th of July 1940. 1 month after enlistment, Simpson was promoted to Lance Corporal and transferred to the 2nd 19th Battalion. A likely reason for Simpson's rapid promotion was the 3 years of military service he had spent with the militia from 1935. The 2nd 19th Battalion were given 6 months of training in Australia. On 4th of February 1941, Simpson's battalion embarked for Singapore on the Queen Mary. The Australians arrived at Singapore on the 18th of February. The 2nd 19th Battalion trained at Port Dickson and Seremban. Training essentially focused on making the Australian troops accustomed to the extreme Malayan jungle conditions. Simpson's connection to Burnside remained strong, even in the jungles of Malaya.
This picture shows children with parcels being sent to Malaya, one of which is Simpson's. After receiving the parcels from the children, Simpson sent a letter back with many thanks.
The Japanese strike at Pearl Harbor in December 1941 was no isolated blow. At the same moment the attacking planes were over Hawaii, Japanese forces were sweeping south, spearheaded by an advance guard of fast Japanese warplanes.
It was in the early hours of December the 8th, 1941, that the Japanese invaded Malaya. Japanese commander General Yamashita drove his forces forward relentlessly, taking over one Malayan town after another. Japanese forces had land tanks, superior air support, and an infantry employed tactics which were difficult to counter by troops not well trained in jungle warfare. January 1942, Simpson was deployed with his battalion to an area east of Bakri to aggressively re-establish the Allied position and repel the Japanese. This, however, was not achieved as the Japanese on the 19th of January began making flanking movements to the rear of the Australian positions. It was to prove deadly.
Japanese had, again on this encircling movement, had cut off the Parrot Shillong people who were coming up from Muir.
All told, there were about 1,000 Australian troops On all sides of them were closing in 15,000 or more crack Japanese troops. Japanese fighters were also attacking from the air. Casualties were mounting and ammunition was in short supply, leading his troops forward into what seemed certain death. Commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Anderson, gave the command to get the boys singing.
The officer in charge there got them to sing Waltzing Matilda, and they doubled. Past the Japs, who were petrified about the whole thing, and they got out, which is an amazing story. But a lot of those people finally were caught up.
One of them was Simpson, who was captured on the 22nd of January and sent to Kuala Lumpur prisoner of war camp, otherwise known as Pudu prison. But for the wounded left behind at the Parit Selong Bridge, they were expecting Red Cross protection. Tragically, the Australians were about to learn a grim lesson about the gross barbarity to which their new enemy would descend.
The wounded were taken out of the trucks and shot or bayoneted, the Parit Selong massacre.
Whilst in prison, Simpson spent 3.5 months in the Australian General Hospital with beriberi and nausea. He was finally discharged from hospital on the 14th of September and rejoined his unit at Changi Prisoner of War Camp. On the 20th of April 1943, Simpson was stationed with F Force and headed for work on the Burma-Thailand Railway.
Can you imagine being sent out to work at 4 o'clock in the morning and getting back into your bunk, which we didn't have, but into your hut at 10 o'clock at night? And that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And many blokes died because the extreme conditions. It was better to die probably than to keep on living.
Simpson contracted beriberi whilst working in these horrific conditions. Douglas Simpson died of cardiac beriberi on the 17th of December 1943. He was just 27 years old.
Well, the war ended in August 1945. The Australian forces in Malaya and Singapore had experienced huge losses. The 2nd 19th Battalion had suffered the highest casualties of any Australian unit in the war. Orphaned as a child, Simpson knew adversity in his life. He left home at the age of 18 and headed for a distant land to fight a new and hostile enemy. There he witnessed the best and worst of humanity, surviving battles against all odds. He spent a year in the hellish conditions of the Burma-Thai Railway and suffered horrendous pain with the contraction of beriberi. Did he triumph over adversity? Was the suffering he endured all worth it? In 1926, Sir James Murdoch, who was the chairman of Burnside, said this small statement:
"Give them a chance, and we shall rise up another generation, worthy of the men who fought in Gallipoli, Egypt and France."
Simpson was a product of this chance. Having come through a very rough childhood as an orphan and struggling through the years of the Depression, it is clear that the work of Burnside homes in the lives of children like Simpson helped to instill in them perseverance and endurance. It is from this that he was able to fight against an enemy that sought to destroy his country.
But if it hadn't been for his generation doing what they did, what language do you think we'd all be speaking here this morning?
On Douglas Simpson's grave are written these words: "They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old." Simpson was a part of a new generation, embodied in the 2nd 19th Battalion that fought in the jungles of Malaya, enduring suffering and sacrificing their lives to give us the freedom that we share today.
As it's turning, the code of decency is now adjourning. The walls are shaking, the earth is quaking, a million hearts behind the smoke are breaking.